They told us it died in the 90s, that it was inefficient, that it couldn't be revived. But what if the rotary engine didn't fail? What if it was silenced? In a sealed chamber outside Hiroshima, a small team of engineers worked under a project labeled Surrect, buried under a stack of shell companies and paper-thin tech grants. At its center stood a strange, smooth housing unit, spinning without pistons, without valves, and without noise. It wasn't just reborn, it was rebuilt for war. In January, Mazda's CEO made a cryptic announcement: "The future will not be plugged in." The audience laughed. But what they didn't see was that testing had already begun on a rotary electric hybrid capable of driving 100 kilometers without touching the grid. It wasn't fiction. It wasn't a prototype. It was already in motion. Inside the prototype was a compact rotary generator, no bigger than a coffee machine, spinning at 12,000 RPM yet capable of powering an EV drivetrain continuously using nothing but biosynthesized ethanol. The thermal efficiency was a jaw-dropping 48.2%, and emissions were near zero. This wasn't a return to combustion, it was a hard reset. Mazda had cracked the one thing EV makers feared most: grid independence. No superchargers, no lithium supply chains, no cobalt mines in the Congo, just fuel you can grow, spin, and recycle on demand. Buried in Japanese patent filings from 2022, Mazda registered a new architecture, MPHV1, a modular platform designed to accept rotary generators as range extenders with support for rapid swap pods. That means motorcycles, boats, and even aircraft can share the same core engine, swapping out fuel pods like batteries. And here's where it gets geopolitical. An internal memo leaked from Japan's Ministry of Trade confirmed the government had funneled over 180 billion yen into Surrect via a front-facing energy startup. Why? Because, in Japan's own words, electric vehicles are not the endgame. Energy sovereignty is. When Western automakers lobbied for stricter EV regulations, Japan didn't push back. They simply pivoted. By 2027, the plan is to deploy rotary-based hybrids across Southeast Asia, bypassing the need for grid infrastructure entirely. Because while Tesla builds charging stations, Mazda builds engines that don't need them. At the Geneva Motor Show, 2 European CEOs privately viewed Mazda's working prototype. Within weeks, one of them, an EV battery firm CEO, resigned without statement. Soon after, their stock was delisted. Behind the scenes, analysts whispered one phrase: rotary detonation. Meanwhile, Toyota quietly licensed 4 key patents from Mazda: rotor cooling systems, hydrogen precompression chambers, and thermal balancing algorithms, indicating that Mazda's tech had cross-platform potential. And here's where the engine stops being just an engine. A new Japanese defense document lists micro-rotary range extenders under a category for unmanned aerial vehicles. Translation: these engines aren't just for cars. They're being built for drones, modular transport, and off-grid military logistics. Because when the grid fails, only fuel survives. Mazda's gamble isn't just technological, it's existential. In a world obsessed with lithium, they've gone back to chemistry. And what they've built may not just disrupt EVs, it may replace them entirely. The Rotary wasn't supposed to fly, not at 30,000 FT, not at sub-zero atmospheric pressure, and definitely not inside an aircraft with no traditional turbine or combustion backup. But in March, a test vehicle linked to Japan's aerospace exploration agency JAXA was spotted over the Pacific with an unmistakable sound signature: ultra-high RPM whine, zero combustion lag, and no thermal plume. The aircraft was unmarked, electric-driven, and its range was classified. It didn't run on batteries. It ran on a rotary pulse system Mazda engineers now refer to as Type Z pulse. Declassified patent filings show that this aviation-grade system uses a pressurized ethanol-hydrogen blend routed through a dual-chamber rotary core with liquid nitrogen cooling. The entire propulsion module weighs under 90 kg and fits in the space of a standard fuel tank. It operates in near silence, generates continuous electrical output, and runs in atmospheric conditions unsuitable for lithium-ion systems. And here's where the data turns deadly. 2 months after Z-Pulse was filed in Japan, Alphava, a US-based long-range drone company funded by DARPA, abruptly halted all prototype flights. Days later, Skyvance, an Australian aerial mapping startup, reported internal combustion failures in its hydrogen electric platform, followed by a total shutdown of R&D. What wasn't disclosed was a shared supplier between them. Rotokinetics, a now defunct lab in Osaka, quietly acquired by Mazda in 2021. In one move, Mazda had absorbed the only team outside government capable of building compact aviation rotaries. And just like that, everyone else fell behind by a decade. Meanwhile, Toyota's hydrogen division made a rare pivot, redirecting 22% of their fuel cell R&D budget toward rotary electric hybrid systems. A leaked internal strategy doc, labeled the Shift Operation H Override, included one chilling line. If Ariite scales, we're no longer competing with Tesla. We're competing with Mazda for the sky. Back on the ground, the oil industry saw the writing on the wall. For the first time in 40 years, rotary engines were fuel agnostic. Unlike piston engines, the new rotary design can adjust ignition cycles to accommodate methanol, ammonia, and even synthetic jet fuel. In field trials, Mazda's engine ran continuously on 5 different fuels without swapping parts, just reprogramming. The implications: total decoupling from fossil fuel supply chains. Saudi Aramco responded fast, launching a shadow R&D initiative focused on synthetic-compatible microgenerators. But it may already be too late. Mazda has partnered with 2 Japanese energy startups to mass-produce container-sized ethanol synthesizers capable of generating fuel using algae, food waste, or even atmospheric CO2. And here's what should terrify the battery world. Each rotary unit has a mean time between overhaul, MTBO, of 11,000 hours, triple the lifespan of Tesla's 4,680 cells under real-world stress. No thermal runaway, no mining, no fire risk, just a spinning chamber and a fuel line. As legacy EV manufacturers scrambled, the panic spread to regulators. In Brussels, members of the European Commission quietly requested emissions exemption reports for rotary hybrids. In Washington, EV tax credit adjustments began to include non-grid electric range extenders. They're not rewriting the rules. They're preparing for the engine they said would never return. And while public attention stayed locked on lithium prices and charging maps, Mazda executed its final strike. A new prototype, RX TX1, was loaded into a shipping container bound for India's largest auto expo. But this wasn't a concept. It was a production-ready drivetrain already homologated for Asian markets. Range: 1,400 kilometers. Refill time: 3 minutes. Fuel type: variable. And tucked into the system specs, one phrase: grid not required. But the world would never see it. Days before the unveiling, Indian customs officials intercepted the container at Nhava Sheva port. No public explanation, no paperwork trail. Satellite imagery later revealed the container had been rerouted inland under military escort to a private testing facility outside Pune. The site was guarded by defense contractors. No press, no public access, and no confirmation the prototype ever left the crate. What emerged 5 days later was not a car. It was a modular drivetrain labeled RXHR1, a rotary electric hybrid platform rated for high-altitude logistics, variable climate transport, and non-grid power conversion. India, long criticized for lagging on EV infrastructure, was now preparing to leapfrog it entirely. Instead of catching up to Tesla, they were aligning with a rotary future, one that needed no supercharger networks, no cobalt imports, and no grid subsidies. Within 30 days, Tata Motors signed a non-disclosure agreement with Mazda's global tech licensing arm. The implications were immediate. Production timelines for India's first mass EVs were quietly delayed. Behind the scenes, Tata's EV roadmap was rewritten to integrate Surrect architecture by 2028. Meanwhile, Japan struck a historic deal with Vietnam to co-develop ethanol-based fuel stations across Southeast Asia. Not for combustion cars, but for rotary electric hybrids optimized for low-cost, non-lithium transport. Every nation with grid instability saw the same opportunity: skip the grid entirely. Inside Volkswagen's HQ, Engineers were told to review a scenario labeled Our Disruption Protocol, a worst-case projection drafted by their internal strategy unit. It concluded that if rotary electric hybrids reach scale across Asia-Pacific by 2027, VW's MEB battery architecture becomes regionally obsolete. The panic wasn't just theoretical. In early field tests in Malaysia, Mazda's rotary generator outperformed BYD's Blade battery in both temperature endurance and power continuity. Worse, the cost per kilometer was 42% lower, and refueling took less than 4 minutes using locally produced ethanol. BYD responded with a $600 million pivot into alternative fuel R&D. NIO halted all plans for Southeast Asian expansion. And CATL, the world's largest EV battery maker, filed a patent for a hybrid battery fuel rotary containment unit, eerily similar to Mazda's early designs. In America, the silence turned surgical. Tesla updated its Gigafactory filings to include alternative range-extending systems, but Elon Musk made no statement. Behind closed doors, a confidential investor briefing confirmed that Tesla's Solar Plus EV ecosystem was vulnerable to disruption by mobile fuel-based generators. Because once energy is mobile, the grid becomes optional. And once energy is fuel-agnostic, lithium is negotiable. One by one, startups folded. Drifton Motors, once hailed as the Norwegian Tesla, shut down its modular EV van program after key investors withdrew, citing unrecoverable obsolescence risk. California-based Freeform Electric laid off 80% of its battery design team. In China, 2 regional EV firms filed for emergency consolidation after losing government contracts now redirected to rotary-compatible platforms. Even Amazon took notice. Their logistics arm began testing low-emission delivery drones equipped with micro-rotary power packs developed by a Tokyo startup rumored to be Mazda-backed. The internal report was blunt. Battery density plateaus, rotary doesn't. But the sharpest twist came from South Korea. Hyundai, long skeptical of combustion hybrid evolution, launched Project AER, an initiative to build a liquid fuel-powered EV platform for mountainous and rural regions. The lead engineer, former Mazda propulsion specialist Dr. K. Morita, who had quietly left the company in 2023. A deep transfer of knowledge, possibly deliberate. And right now, in an underground chamber beneath Hiroshima, Mazda is testing dual-rotor rotary arrays linked to capacitive boosters capable of charging supercapacitors mid-flight. The goal is no longer to match EVs, it's to make batteries optional permanently. In research halls from California to Tokyo, the world's top solid-state battery firms are in crisis. Quantum Ion Corporation, once hailed as the future of energy storage, saw 3 prototype cells explode during thermal cycling tests, triggering an emergency halt across its entire pilot line. Solid Safe Technologies reported a 52% drop in energy density once cooled below 10°, invalidating their core claim of all-weather performance. Lion Energy, the startup that raised $420 million on promises of ultra-fast charge, was forced to lay off 60% of its staff after failing to secure a single manufacturing partner. Mega Apps, the up-and-comer from Germany, quietly sold its production equipment to a Chinese consortium in Shenzhen, an admission that capital costs for solid-state remain 5 times higher than lithium-ion. And buried in a February patent filing by Next Gen Materials, there's a reference to a leaked rotary-driven ionic recombination process, hinting that even battery pioneers are scrambling to merge combustion with their latest chemistries. As panic spreads beyond the labs, governments are racing to recalibrate regulations. In Berlin, draft legislation proposes a complete ban on rotary-powered vehicles under the guise of harmful vibration emissions, with fines up to $2 million per unit. The European Commission quietly inserted a sunset clause into its EV subsidies effective 2029 that excludes any vehicle using an internal generator, a direct jab at Mazda's modular pods. A trove of IRS filings reveals at least $75 million funneled through dark money nonprofit Energy Futures Alliance, funding AstroTurf campaigns in Brussels and Washington to cast rotary engines as environmental regressions. The U.S. Department of Energy's own internal memo admits that changing the EV tax credit to penalize range extenders could neutralize grid-independent threats, but flags serious national security concerns if rural communities lose off-grid mobility options. Meanwhile, a new lobbying group called Citizens for Clean Charge sprung up overnight, led by ex-Tesla executives pushing for battery-only regulations with astonishingly deep pockets and no disclosed donors. Above the fray, hidden operations accelerate. In a subterranean bunker beneath Hiroshima, engineers are now assembling Grid X, a networked rotary generator array capable of feeding microgrids across entire neighborhoods. A leaked blueprint for the RX mesh pod shows a unit smaller than a suitcase, able to link 10 other pods in a self-healing power loop, perfect for disaster zones or off-grid expeditions. Military contracts under the codename Project Ironworld allocate funds for mobile refuel depots disguised as shipping containers, each carrying tons of bioethanol synthesized from agricultural waste. Stock markets reacted. Shares of Lithium World, the largest global miner, plunged 18% in 2 trading sessions, while biofuel tech soared 65% on rumors of exclusive supply deals with Mazda's energy arm. And tucked inside an unmarked envelope delivered to select defense analysts, there's a single phrase scrawled in red. Prepare for the grid collapse event. They said the rotary engine was a relic. They said batteries were the end of the line. But now a new era dawns, where combustion and electrons merge, where energy is artfully untethered, and where the fight for power moves beyond metals and minerals into the realm of chemistry and physics. The final battle lines are drawn. Thanks for watching. If you want to stay ahead of the next big disruption, hit subscribe and turn on notifications.